This one's better? Okay, great. Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to the Open Social presentation. My name is Kevin Marks. This is Chris Chabot. And we're here to talk to you about Open Social and what it can do for you. We've got quite a lot to get through this morning, so my apologies if we talk a little bit fast. I'll try and keep it clear as much as I can. I'm going to start explaining what the point of Open Social is. Chris will explain about how to build an Open Social application. I'll explain about different kinds of container and what that means. Chris will then explain best practice for applications. I'll talk about the role of containers, and Chris will explain how to become one. And then we'll bring some Open Social partners onto the stage to explain how they've built containers that you can work with. So there's a lot of talk about cloud computing, and I wanted to get back to explaining this in the way that it was originally explained. My generation of network engineers draw the internet as a cloud. Tim Berners-Lee puts it this way. The point of cloud computing is that you don't have to worry about the wires. Instead of having to navigate phone lines from one computer to the next, you can write programs as though the net were just one big cloud, where the messages go in at your computer and come out the destination one. So, in effect, you're putting a cloud around some of the complications that you otherwise would have to think about. So, the idea of the cloud is as a cloud that hides things, that means that you don't have to worry about them. So, the original web, the original internet put a cloud around connections between computers. Tim Berners-Lee added the cloud around web documents. Another way of thinking about this is what Douglas Adams calls a somebody else's problem field. If somebody else is worrying about it, you don't have to. So that's the point of the cloud. But what's missing is a cloud around social things. Now, once we've defined this abstraction, this cloud, the younger generation don't see it. It stops being a cloud and starts being oxygen to them. It's part of their lives. This is my son, Andrew. I had a conversation with him where I talked about, he said, did you have Cartoon Network when you were young? And I said, when I was young, we had the BBC, and there were 2 TV channels. They were black and white. There were 2 hours of children's programs per day. And that's what we had. And he thought about this and he said, you must have spent all your time on the net then. So for him, he couldn't imagine the net not being there. And that's what happens. Once we put a cloud around something, it becomes invisible. And then people can stop worrying about that and move on to worrying about something else. Now, the older generation doesn't see this cloud as something helpful. They see it as toxic gas, poison gas, that gets in the way of the way they've always done things. So the thing to look out for is, are there things where we behave like that too? And one example of that is social networking. Now, social networking sites have been built for at least 10 years. There's a timeline here that's put together by some social networking researchers that goes back to 1997, and you can see there were several social networking sites, and there were more and more over time. They grew up to be really important over the last couple of years, to the point where the general public now understands them and knows what they are. But what has happened there is that this has changed the way the net works. There's some complications there. What's happened is the social network sites are all very distinct. They're like a lot of different countries. And you may have visited some of these countries. You may have friends who live in them, but you probably don't know all of them. And they're all a bit obscure to you. It's like traveling to different parts of Europe or different parts of Africa and not knowing what's going on there. The other thing is that for the younger generation, email is something, although, for us, email is something that we live with. For the younger generation, email is only used for talking to their parents or their teachers. It's not something that they live on because they've decided to live inside the social networks instead. All their friends are in there, they're not on email. So we've realized this. We all want to make our sites social. But then what happens? Well, we have to find out things about people. We have to ask them questions. And so we put registration forms up. So every site you go to now asks you questions. It says, what's your name? Where do you live? Who are your friends? Can I have your email password so I can find out who your friends are? And so on. And this causes a couple of problems. For the users, this causes the problem that every site is asking them questions that they don't necessarily want to answer. And if you put up forms like this, you'll find that about half your users give up and go away. So there's this challenge that in order to do something socially useful with your website, you have to know this information. But if you ask people to give it to you, they'll either leave and not come back, or they'll lie to you. Now, my favorite example of this is American sites that ask you for zip codes. So they say, give us your zip code. And if you're from Europe, you go, a zip code? What's that? From England, like me, you say, okay, I kind of understand what that is. But they make this field required. And then suddenly they say, why do we have so many users in Beverly Hills and Schenectady? Well, that's because these are the zip codes that people in Europe know. They always fill in 90210 for the TV series or 12345. So what happens is, if you force people to give you information, they lie to you. They don't tell you the truth. So the challenge is, how can you build a social application if your users are lying to you? Well, people already have these sites that they've told their social information to. All these different sites like MySpace, like Viadeo, we can go on. That's where these are the sites that have already gathered this social information because people have decided they are doing something useful with it. They can trust them with their information. And so the point of Open Social is to let you have access to the information that people have already shared with these sites to use in your applications. But the problem with this was that all of these different sites had different APIs. In order to talk to these sites and get the data out of them and use that in your application, you had to write specific code for every single site. So the design of Open Social was to provide a common API in between that you can talk to, and it will draw the site from whichever site the users have chosen to store their social information. You can draw on that and use that within your application. So there are three kinds of information that we abstract, that we represent within Open Social. Information about friends, who you know and what you know about them. Information about activities, which is what you do on the site. And information about data, which is basically data that your application stores that's tied to people. Each of these has a representation within Open Social that you can write to and will work the same way whichever social site is hosting the core data. We're putting this cloud, this abstraction layer, around these three kinds of information about people and friends, information about actions, about what you do, and generalized data that your application provides that's tied to people. Now, the person information, there's several fields that every social site has on the left side, which are like name, user ID, photo, and profile URL. These are often all you need to do something useful. If you can show somebody's photograph and their name next to some information, your users will understand that, know who provided that information, and they will use their own minds to understand what that means socially. But in addition, we have a whole series of other fields that are defined, including things like age, favorite URLs, favorite books, favorite movies, are they a smoker, and lots of other social fields that these different sites collect. Not every site will have these, but if it's there, you can discover it and use that in your application if you need to. Now, as well as the Open Social abstraction of this, we've represented this in a way that can be reused across lots of other sites as well as social networking sites. And this is the Portable Contacts API. This is the REST API for Open Social, but it's also this common API for representing contact information that works with webmail that works with other sites that store personal contact information. This is it's a separate standards body, portablecontacts.net, but we work with them with OpenSocial to make sure the standards are actually the same, so you can use the same code to interact with both. So this is something we expect to see growing over the next few months. This was released about a month ago. There's already support for that in more places than there is just for OpenSocial itself. The next abstraction is the data store. The idea here is your application wants to store some data, but it's tied to people. It's connected to user IDs. So you can put data into the cloud, into the OpenSocial container, with a user ID attached. Then you can ask for information for the person who's looking at the page or for their friends and get that data back that you've already stored in there, which means you don't necessarily have to store that data yourself in your own databases. You can rely on the OpenSocial container to store that for you. And then the third thing is activities. Now, this idea is something that's relatively new. In fact, it's been around for a while in quite a lot of applications, but it's become obvious over the last year or so that this is something people like, which is the ability to see what they've been doing or see what their friends have been doing with your application over time. So if you think about the Facebook feed, the MySpace feed of what you do in the site, this is what's reflected back to you. With an OpenSocial application, you can send activities into this stream of events, and the container will present them back to the users. And you can also draw back the activities that you've posted there yourself. And again, you can draw back both the ones for the person viewing the application and for their friends. So you can get the subset of activities that matters to the user. Now, one of the reasons that this is useful is scaling. There's always a problem with building social applications is that you get unexpected growth, because once people tell their friends, their friends tell their friends, and it grows like this. And there's a problem of how do I do the correlation between all these people? And by making this the problem of the container rather than yourself, you're able to not worry about having to scale up your databases rapidly, because any container you're running in has already dealt with that problem for the number of users they have. So they can already cope with data tied to people and things people do in your app for the number of users that they have. So this means you can build an application without having to necessarily have your own database and worrying about bringing it to tens or hundreds of millions of users. Now hand over to Chris.
So I quickly wanted to go over how to build an OpenSocial application. As Kevin Marks already talked about, OpenSocial is a standard for being able to build applications that can run on any OpenSocial enabled container. Container is what we call a social website that contains OpenSocial applications. So an OpenSocial application is basically at the moment a combination of HTML, JavaScript and style sheets. That's how you build an application. And you put that in something called a gadget XML file. Now, a gadget XML file has all the definitions, things like, hey, what's my title that's going to be shown above the application. It will have features in it. Here we have an example for a feature called OpenSocial. You could put different version numbers in there. It will always work with that version of the JavaScript libraries that you required. And you can put your data in there. Here you see the content type is HTML. We got some script in there. This will get executed and will alert hello world. So that's the basic of how you write an XML file. That's an OpenSocial gadget. So you have your OpenSocial feature, as we call it. So you want to be able to do interesting things with social information. This is how you would request social information in JavaScript for OpenSocial. You create a request, that's OpenSocial new data request. Then you say, well, I want to have the viewer information. I also want to have the viewer friend information. That will get executed. And it will be executed asynchronously in the background. It's an XML HTTP request. As soon as it finishes, it will call the function that you defined. Here it's called onload friends. That function will be executed, and in the function you will get a parameter, it's called response here, which contains all the information that you can do things with. So you've got your names, you've got all the social information you requested, and you can build something on the screen using that. Persistent data is one of the other things that OpenSocial offers. What you would do is you create a request again, and then you add things to it like, hey, I want to update some information. It will take that key and store it on the server. It's a basic hash map. So you've got a key and a value pair, and you can store multiple key value pairs on the server. And you can use that for things like storing a high score if you're building a game, for instance. To retrieve it is the same thing as retrieving social information, except in this case, you're doing a new fetch person app data request. But for the rest, it's the same as fetching the viewer information and fetching the owner information. Activities is the third thing that we support in the API. Activities you're probably familiar with from all the websites will show you, hey, Kevin Marks really liked this book, and I'll see that activity in my activity streams because we're friends. So an application can also create activities. Activities are a great way for an application to show the interesting things that happened within the social graph. And you create those with an OpenSocial.new activity request. I went through it quicker than I thought, and it's Kevin Marks with the types of containers.
Okay. So we've talked about OpenSocial providing this abstraction layer between your application and the containers. The point of the containers is that they provide the social context that the users are used to. By separating these, it saves you the problem of having to create the registration forms, create the databases, store all the social data. You can just ask this from the container. The user has already given the information there. Your application just sees user IDs, but the container makes them into people because the users have already told the container information about them. The users understand how the containers behave and what information they make available to whom. Your application doesn't have to worry about that. You can just ask for the information. You'll either get it or not, depending on the permissions that the container and the user have set up. And the key thing that it saves both you and your users from is this continuously re-registering for the same applications, telling them the same information, telling them who your friends are, and so on. One thing to be aware of is the containers don't really choose who their users are. The containers set up a social site and the users choose to join them. They grow through people recommending the site to each other. I talk about homophily, which is people liking people who are like them, and affinity, finding things in common with each other. This is a chart that Le Monde put together showing which countries have been won by which social network, but that isn't the right way of looking at it. What actually happens is that people tell their friends about these sites, it spreads out through friendship groups, and then they bump into the already existing cultural and linguistic boundaries in the world. So every social site I've spoken to tells me a story that they set up the site and they found users they weren't expecting. The classic example is Orkut, the social site that Google founded, which has a huge number of users in Brazil and India, which wasn't what was expected. Those users came to the site and found it useful and told their friends and shared it. And so it got a huge Brazilian user base even before it was localized into Portuguese, when it was still an English site. So what happens is that these sites gather the users through friendship, through the application spreading that way, and then they have to adapt to that. And the smart sites say, oh, we've got a lot of Portuguese users, we should translate to Portuguese, rather than saying, right, we should set up a site for Portuguese users. So what you find is that many of these social sites will have user bases around the world, and you may not be aware of them all because you'll only know the ones you've already visited. Okay. So the point of OpenSocial, it gets you to all these different users of all these different sites. You don't have to decide which social networking site to write your application for. You can write it and it will work across all these different sites that are available. You get to spread in the same random way that these sites grew and find out where your users, which users want to use your app, and be able to be set up to localize it, to translate into different languages yourself. And the different containers have tools to help you do that. The other thing that I wanted to cover here is that it's not just social networking sites that act as containers. There's many different kinds of sites that will work this, and I'll I won't go through this in this slide. I'll work through this once I've explained how this fits together. So we have this idea of the viewer and the viewer friends. Chris mentioned that and showed you how to call that. So the viewer is the person using your application. Their friends are people they already know. But we also have this idea of the owner and the owner friends. On a social networking site, this will be the person who has put your application on their profile. So your app, as it runs, can find both these sets of people, the person looking at it and the person who installed it. And what you get are IDs. And what you can see is if you have an ID in each of these graphs and they match, you'll know that those people are actually friends. That's the abstraction you get. But the subtlety here is that the owner is not necessarily a person. The owner can be an organization, or it could be a thing, a social object. So in that case, the page isn't that the viewer is looking at doesn't represent a person, it represents something else. And that's how we map this to different kinds of social networking sites. So for the classic social networking sites, we have profile pages where the owner is the profile page owner, the person who's talking about themselves and who's installed the application. The viewer, you may not be able to know who the viewer is. It'll depend on the site. Some sites you have to log in, it knows who the viewer is. Other sites, anyone can browse it and you don't know who's looking at the page directly. But this is the classic social network site, and MySpace, High5, and Orkut are the sort of big examples of this. But there's other kinds of container. There's what we call a personal dashboard. This is like the home page on a social networking site. The owner is always the viewer. When you're looking at this site, the person who controls it is the same person who's looking at it. If you think about iGoogle and the gadgets that are running on there, you're always looking at your own page and not looking at your friend's page. My Yahoo is like this too, and my AOL is the same. But there are other kinds of container too. There's what we call a social object site. This is a site where the point is to share things. So if you think of a site like Flickr or YouTube, the focus is on a photograph in Flickr and a video in YouTube. So there, the owner of the page would be the object, the thing that's being shared. The owner friends are people who are connected to that object. They may have made it, they may be fans of it, but the viewer is still the person looking at it. So you can run an application within this site and discover these viewers nodes in the same way. The next kind of container to think about are CRM systems, corporate sites that are for customer relationship management. Here, the pages reflect the customer, the person who the record is about. So the owner of the page is the customer, and the owner friends are people who are connected to that customer in some way. They may be colleagues of the viewer, they may be other customers. But the viewer is still the person looking at it. So this gives you a way to represent business systems within OpenSocial. And Oracle and Salesforce are looking at using OpenSocial in this way. And then the final kind of container that we talk about is any website. In this case, the owner is the website. And then the owner friends are everyone who's logged into the site, who kind of logged into it. And again, the viewer is the person looking at it. So Google Friend Connect gives an example of this. Google Friend Connect is a way of adding a little bit of JavaScript to any website that makes it into a social site, so that it will let people log into it, draw on their friendships from other sites, and let you run open social applications within any website in that way.
So we have more content here actually that we're going to be able to cover in one session. Can I just ask, who here would like to develop an open social application that you're interested in? Okay, I see a couple of hands. And who here would like to become an open social container? A few less hands. So I think we're going to focus a little bit more on the application part, and we'll skip through the other parts really quickly because we have some partners here with us as well today who are also going to be presenting. So we're going to save the last 20 minutes for them. So I want to go through the best practices for developing an application. When you're developing an open social application, we've shown the basic example. If you go to code.google.com/opensocial, we have a lot of articles there to get you started. We also have a code lab later today where you can come in and we'll help you get started going through the initial process of how to build an application. We're more than happy to help you out there with setting it up. A few of the things that I wanted to give away with this is some of the best practices. you need to keep in mind when you're developing an open social application. The first one, that's the basic, don't forget to check for errors. Whenever you do a data request in open social, the response that you have will both have an error on the main request if something went wrong, or if you did multiple requests, the sub-requests can also have errors in them. So always make sure that whatever you requested came in correctly, otherwise you're going to have errors on the screen, and that doesn't look as good as a normal message where you notify a user that something went wrong. The other thing is be specific. A lot of people will send off an owner request or a viewer request or a friend request, and they expect all information to be in there. But from an efficiency point of view, open social doesn't work that way. You have to specify what fields you want to get back. There will always be an ID, there will always be a URL, and that's pretty much it. That's guaranteed. So if you want to have more information like the gender or a profile URL, you have to add it to the parameters of the request, as I've highlighted here in blue. The next thing is, if you want to do special things in an open social container, high five, I'm using that as an example here, they have some extra fields for when they're using with media items. So you can say, hey, if this feature is present, you can use that extra feature set. Otherwise, you're just going to leave out that part of the application, which is great when you're developing an application for multiple containers. The same way, you can see what fields are supported. If you want to make an application that uses a horoscope sign as an optional feature, it's a good idea in your application to make sure that the social site that you're running on actually does support horoscope signs. So with this open social get environment supported fields, you get a Boolean value return saying, hey, we do support this feature or we don't. And that allows you to develop applications that will do extra things if they're supported. The other thing is, open social applications are loaded in the iframe. It's an Ajax style environment, so you want it to be as fast as possible. You want to be on the screen as fast as possible. One of the things that we advise people to use is to use the caching system of the container. The container has a proxy server, and you can use it even in JavaScript for when you're putting images or any other information on the screen. You can say, hey, get the proxy URL for this image, and the container will actually cache that request for you. And it can even preload it for you, which means it will be on the screen instantly instead of having to go to your server separately. Last thing is, open social gadgets are web files in the end. So keep in mind that it's web development, and look at all the basic web development techniques that if you're looking at YSlow and other optimization techniques, these are the things that are important, that you're using your caching headers, that you're combining your JavaScript files, because making one request for a big file is a lot faster than making 12 requests for a lot of smaller files. Combine your CSS in the same way. You can use sprite techniques where you put a lot of small images in one big image file, and you use style sheets to say, hey, I want to show this small part of it. Again, it reduces the amount of requests. We're also hosting open source Ajax libraries on Google. The nice thing is that people are more likely to already have it in their browser cache, so that will load a lot faster as well. And look at all the other web optimization techniques, like gzipping your content so it loads faster, minifying JavaScript. Basically follow all the YSlow rules on it. Now, when you're hosting an open social application, of course you can host it on your own server, and that's absolutely great. One of the things to keep in mind is if you become very popular, you could get a lot of traffic going to your servers. So much so that you have to look at things like database sharding, a lot of scalability issues. It can become quite tricky if you're actually very popular. iLike is an application that a lot of people use, and they get over 200,000 requests per minute on their peak traffic. You need a big server farm for that. So one of the other things you can do is actually use cloud computing, as we're talking a lot about today. We've got Google App Engine, Joyent.com. They've got a free service for starting developers where you can host your application on their servers and you can pay for it to scale out. And Amazon has their own hosting cloud services too, of course. These are a couple of resources where you can get started. Basically, if you go to opensocial.org, you can find all the documentation there and links to other articles. So I think we're going to have to skip over this part because we're not going to make it. So one of the things I quickly wanted to touch on for the people interested in becoming a container, and I'll go through this rather quickly, is if you want to become an open social enabled website, you can either use Friend Connect if you have a blog or a simple site, but if you want to be a full-blown social website, you can use Apache Shindig. That's software that a lot of people create, a lot of partners in combination with Google, that you can install on your server and customize for your own needs. And it is an engine that renders open social applications for you and provides all the functionality to become an open social container. So it's an Apache project, it's open source, Apache licensed. That means that you can use it in commercial settings and in open source settings. You can find it in incubator.apache.org/shindig, and we've got all the instructions there on how to set it up. And I'm gonna skip through this a little bit. The one thing I did want to note is that actually implementing Shindig, getting the basics up and running is not that much work. What you have to do is implement the 3 basic classes that integrate Shindig with your data source. There's the people information, the application data, and activities. In these classes, you just have to define some functions that are predefined for you, fill them in. Here's an example for activities. As you can see, the basic functionality is a few lines of code. You have to do this for 12 functions, and you already have a basic up and running open social environment. After that, of course, you do have to add some extra stuff. You're starting with the little toy truck. When you're done with your integration, you want to go to the really big one in the end. So you need to add user interfaces to it, application galleries, take care of scalability issues. We found that most open social sites take about 2 or 3 months from start to finish to really have an up and running open social environment on their site. The last thing you always want to take care of is scalability issues and concurrency issues, otherwise you end up with this situation. But there's a lot of resources online that you can check into. I've collected a couple of links for if you're interested in becoming container at shabbotc.com/GDD, Google Developer Days. I suggest that as a start for if you're interested. So I wanted to give the stage to Freebar, Stefano. I think you're going to do the presentation. They're the local Italian social network site and going to show a little bit about what they've created.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much, Kevin. Hi, everyone. Penso che preferite che parli italiano, vero? Visto che sono italiano. Quindi continuerò in italiano. Va bene. Dunque, presento il nostro progetto che è freebar.com, social network italiano. È nato nel 2003 come una community di un liceo e al momento ad oggi, dopo 5 anni, abbiamo circa 500.000 di utenti. Abbiamo uno dei più grandi forum italiani e abbiamo la nostra caratteristica principale che abbiamo una presenza locale fortissima. Nello specifico organizziamo e promuoviamo differenti eventi, circa 20 ogni settimana, in diverse città italiane e nello specifico la nostra presenza è fortissima dalla città da cui noi proveniamo, ovvero Napoli. A Napoli insomma abbiamo una presenza locale fortissima, organizziamo anche eventi locali, addirittura anche tornei sportivi e ludici. Il nostro sito in questo momento è disponibile sia in interfaccia italiana che in inglese. Come si può immaginare, la nostra presenza è fortemente italiana, il 95% delle persone provengono dall'Italia e il 98% delle persone parlano italiano. Il 25% di queste provengono da Napoli e il 30% dalla Campania, dunque abbiamo una fortissima localizzazione nel sud Italia. Una caratteristica principale del nostro social network è una fortissima presenza di uomini. Il 66% delle persone sono di sesso maschile e il 34% di sesso femminile. E poi la caratteristica fondamentale che può essere di particolare interesse per chi vuole sviluppare applicazioni per Freebar è che le applicazioni particolarmente popolari per il nostro social network sono quelle di chat e dating, ovvero Freebar in questo particolare momento è molto utilizzato per poter trovare, come scopo avere l'incontro. Dunque le applicazioni di chat e di dating sono particolarmente utilizzate. Poi caratteristiche fondamentali del nostro social network sono che abbiamo una fidelizzazione degli utenti veramente molto interessante e il tempo di utilizzo del sito medio visite giornaliere è veramente molto molto grande, addirittura 45 minuti, che è addirittura oltre la media dei social network quali Facebook o ad altri. Siamo insomma in numeri particolarmente interessanti. Bene, andiamo al dunque. Freebar ha rilasciato il suo container open social che è già live in una beta per tutti quanti gli utenti, ciò che significa che voi potete già cominciare a sviluppare e poter testare quali sono le potenzialità offerte dal nostro container open social, ovviamente con relative limitazioni. Al momento sono state già approvate 30 applicazioni sviluppate del FreeBar, abbiamo una ventina di sviluppatori, principalmente tutti quanti provenienti da altri container che sviluppano applicazioni per noi, nessuno di questi è italiano, e l'implementazione del nostro container open social è, come detto prima da Chris, basata sulla implementazione di PHP di Shindig. La versione che al momento supportiamo è la 0.7 e prevediamo nel giro di qualche mese di supportare anche la 0.8. Abbiamo da pochi giorni messo online una nuova developer zone, che è l'angolo dedicato agli sviluppatori, angolo attraverso il quale è possibile innanzitutto poter caricare e poter gestire le vostre applicazioni, quindi poterle testare, e la caratteristica peculiare della nostra developer zone, che è differente da tutti altri social network, è che è possibile poter testare la vostra applicazione in un ambiente sicuro, in un ambiente di sviluppo, ovvero potete testare le applicazioni, testare le funzionalità prima di metterle online, cosa che è interessante e che insomma pochi social network permettono. Quindi potete usare FreeBar in questo momento anche per poter debuggare e poter testare le vostre applicazioni. È poi possibile trovare informazioni riguardo allo stato corrente della nostra integrazione di open social in FreeBar. Stiamo continuamente integrando nuove funzionalità e stiamo implementando nuove funzioni, e c'è una pagina dedicata in cui potete proprio ottenere informazioni su qual è il nostro stato attuale di integrazione di open social in FreeBar. Poi ovviamente potete contattarci secondo noi è una fondamentale importanza, perché la comunicazione con gli sviluppatori è ovviamente un'importanza fondamentale. È riportato qui il link, ma insomma se andate su FreeBar troverete anche semplicemente il link diretto alla nostra developer zone. Qui c'è uno screenshot della nostra developer zone rilasciata da pochi giorni. Riguardo alle nostre linee guida, il titolo era linee guida delle nostre applicazioni. Ovviamente ci sarà comunque una selezione delle applicazioni, non saranno tutte quante ad uscire, e diciamo ci saranno delle whitelist di applicazioni di qualità. Principalmente c'è un principio da seguire, che è quello di salvaguardare la user experience. Se si sviluppano applicazioni di qualità saranno tutte quante approvate. Un altro principio fondamentale, come potete ben capire, è il principio della internazionalizzazione. FreeBar ha una fortissima localizzazione italiana, prevediamo di uscire in nuovi mercati ma non nel breve termine, quindi si tratta comunque di attendere qualche mese, e di conseguenza l'internalizzazione, quindi la localizzazione, sono fondamentale importanza. Nel caso voi siete sviluppatori stranieri, possiamo aiutarvi nella internazionalizzazione, traducendo la vostra applicazione in italiano, se questa sarà risposta ovviamente per poter essere internazionalizzata. La pubblicità è completamente permessa all'interno della canvas view, non è permessa all'interno delle view di profile e di home, e non è prevista alcuna revenue share, quindi potete guadagnare il 100% del profitto e potete scegliere al 1000 per 1000 i vostri inserzionisti. La nostra implementazione di open social al momento riguardano le future implementazioni di open social, anche qui manca il titolo, sono la home e profile view, che prevediamo di inserire nei prossimi mesi, e poi le funzionalità principali che permetteranno una espansione virale alla vostra applicazione. Nello specifico le funzionalità di invio messaggi, di condivisione dell'applicazione, quindi di invitare i vostri amici sulla propria applicazione, di inviare commenti. E poi prevediamo, a differenza di altri container, una fortissima integrazione delle applicazioni all'interno di FreeBar. Forte integrazione che per noi significa di inserire i link delle applicazioni all'interno dei link precisi del menu principale di FreeBar, oltre che all'interno della home e della profile view. Ciò assicurerà quindi una diffusione virale alle vostre applicazioni. Potete controllare lo stato corrente della nostra implementazione di open social all'interno di una pagina dedicata che si chiama Roadmap all'interno della nostra developer zone. Se avete dei dubbi riguardo l'implementazione di Shindig, se qualcuno di voi è interessato comunque a voler implementare il proprio contenuto open social, potete anche chiederci a noi dei consigli. Se invece volete sviluppare applicazioni per FreeBar, ci vediamo su FreeBar.
And keep in mind that later today there's another code lab. All the containers will be there as well. So if you want to talk to them, ask them about their container, how you can get started on it, or translations, any other services they can help you with, make sure to come around and talk to them there. Next up we have Peter de Schepper. He's from Netlog. And keep in mind you have about 8 minutes. Cool.
Hi, sorry I can't do it in Italian because I'm Dutch. So first, what is Netlog? Netlog is a social networking site. So you have your own profile pages. We have our activity streams. You can do shouts to your friends. It's like small messages you do publicly. Then we have also the private messages to your friends. You can have chats with your friends, and we also have, since 2 weeks, we have now a personal homepage, so the user can adapt all social elements they want into their own personal homepage. And so we have lots of social content. how we're doing. We have a lot of users. We are mostly European based, or most of our users are European, but we are now expanding it to Asia and other continents as well. So we have at the moment 23 languages and a lot more coming. And oops, I forgot to update that. We have about 3 million Italian users, active users that is. So applications on Netlog. At the moment we support OpenSocial 0.7, but are working towards being compliant with 0.8. So this is the canvas view of BuddyPoke. It's a very popular application. As you can see, we launched it about 1.5 weeks ago in Italy, and it has already 160,000 installs. So this is a profile view of that application, so you can see what Pokesy already has done. And soon we will also make a home view available for that new personal homepage. We have our own directory of applications that are available. So this is how the user finds the different applications. And then we have some viral networks such as the application log. So it's basically the same as the activity stream. So you can post activity to that activity stream and all your friends will see the updates. We also have the share functionality, so you can share applications with your friends. So requirements. We are whitelisting applications because we want applications to be fully integrated. So that's why we don't allow external logins and external links. So the user just stays into Netlog. We also don't allow ads and profile view and no spamming through activities and requests and things like that. So we will be whitelisting on that. And as Mark already mentioned, be prepared to localize your applications because we are very localized. We work very localized. As I mentioned, we have over 23 languages. So make sure that your application can be localized. But in that, we can help you. For that, we have made a translation system that helps the developers. So what you basically do is you make one application XML file with all your strings that has to be translated. It's in the gadget specifications if you look into it. We take out that XML, we parse the strings, and we put it in our translation system, and it gets translated by our translators. And when the translations are done, we automatically put those translations into your application. So as a developer, you don't really have to worry about translations. You just have to make your application localized. So yeah, you can see that here. This is basically how the gadget XML is built up, and you see the locales that represent the language files. So you provide the all XML with the strings you need, and we insert all the other languages that are needed. So as I mentioned, we don't allow ads on the profile view. We do allow them on the canvas view, but we also have other ways for monetizing your applications. So we can do branding, co-branding, and sponsorships in your applications. On the application page, on the canvas view, you can have a vertical rectangle or skyscraper, and you get 100% revenues on that. But on Netlog, we also have our own credit economy. It's with micropayments. So, and we will open that credit economy to our OpenSocial applications as well. So how does this work? All our users have credits that they acquire through micropayments, so you don't have to worry about that. And you can simply request a certain amount of money for special actions in your applications. For instance, monthly fee or for special highly integrated features. So you just request a certain amount of money, and through our credits API, you will get that money. So if you have more questions, you can go to these links, or you can contact me. I'm here all day.
And lastly, we have Viadea with us here today as well. And Ariel's going to show a little bit of their website.
Se sopravvivo, my English is very bad, vi sorbite l'italiano. Non mi chiamo Ariel Messias, sono il country manager Italia, Ariel Messias, il CTO dell'azienda, e vi spiego un attimo chi siamo e che cosa possiamo fare per voi. Viadeo è un business social network, più noto LinkedIn, noi siamo una versione europea, diciamo, dove le persone si incontrano per 3 motivi: gestire la loro rete di contatti, curare la loro carriera e utilizzare Viadeo come business tool. In Europa e in Cina abbiamo più di 5 milioni di utenti. Io ho aperto la sede in Italia 1 anno e mezzo fa. In questo momento in Italia raggiungiamo circa 300.000 iscritti, in realtà sono 160.000 attivi e funzionanti, gli altri 130.000 ce li ho parcheggiati in una community che deve diventare pubblica, di cui alcune cose. La legge sulla privacy mi vincola un pochettino, e sostanzialmente il network di Viadeo dà accesso a soprattutto un mercato che è sviluppatissimo in Francia, dove è nato nel 2003, e il resto d'Europa. Questo network si caratterizza, a differenza di altri analoghi, per essere localizzato in 7 lingue, 8 se si include la Cina, e orientato all'alto livello direzionale. Per quanto riguarda il mercato italiano, il 35% degli iscritti si va dal direttore vendite in su, titolari, proprietari d'azienda, amministratori delegati, a direttori generali. Questo fatto è avvenuto per il modo in cui siamo andati a implementare la viralità sul territorio e gli accordi con grosse associazioni di categoria. Quindi nel momento in cui come sviluppatori pensate a usare Viadeo, dovete pensare a un network che è multisettoriale, a differenza di, io parlo sempre con qualche competitor è più forte sul mondo ICT, noi cerchiamo di essere presenti in fiere di settore e localmente, quindi aggregare persone che lavorano nel mondo di tutti i settori industriali, e questa è una cosa che dovete tenere presente quando svilupperete applicazioni e userete in questi contesti, per raggiungere nicchie di settore e soprattutto per raggiungere persone che sono alte nella fascia di possibilità di spending. Quindi non pensate a fare crowdsourcing con microtransazioni, ma pensate a mettere in piedi applicazioni che possano essere ben pagate da chi ne ha un beneficio. Un business network è molto captive per applicazioni di gestione di clienti, gestione di attività di vendita e affini. Sostanzialmente le motivazioni per cui le persone lo utilizzano sono queste, e la mail a cui mandare qualsiasi richiesta per come sviluppare sulla nostra sandbox informazioni è opensocial@viadeo.com. Per accedere alla stessa basta registrarsi in Viadeo, in fondo alla pagina c'è un link che rimanda al developers, vi manda nella pagina Open Social, è una sandbox a parte, è un ambiente di test, potete giocare, sviluppare, vedere come funziona senza creare problemi al sito in produzione. Poi la messa in produzione delle applicazioni è sicuramente in mano nostra, nel senso decidiamo a 4 mani che cosa è interessante per il mondo business e cosa no. Grazie.
So you've heard from 3 containers there. This is the list of different containers that support OpenSocial, and although you may recognize some of the ones who've spoken here, you won't know most of these. Even I don't know who all these are, because it covers many different countries and many different languages. And obviously, as Chris says, if you want to become a container yourself, you can do that too and add yourself to this list too. The point of OpenSocial is that we provide the abstraction, the glue code that goes between your application and the users of all these different sites. So are there any, I think we've got a bit of time left for questions. If anybody got any questions about OpenSocial in general? No? Oh. Okay.
Well, with that, we're done. I hope you found the session informative and useful. We'll be in the Code Labs all the rest of the day, in the containers as well. So come and chat with us. We'll help you getting started with either being a container or writing an OpenSocial application. And we'll hope to see you there. Thanks for coming.